wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast, where we talk about ancient philosophy and how it applies to modern life. I'm Dan Monks of Queens, New York City, and today I'm joined by
Steve Caravat in Howard, Ohio.
Steve and I have been examining Cicero's Stoic paradoxes in order, and for those who have been listening, you will know that last week neither of us found Stoic paradox number 3 very compelling. And similarly, we checked in with each other before meeting up today and discovered that neither of us found Stoic paradox number 4 particularly persuasive either. So, as a consequence, in this episode, we will discuss both paradox number 4 and number 5. We don't want to have 2 weeks in a row where we present something and then afterwards say, I don't agree with it, and just leave it at that.
We want to have higher quality material for you, something you can apply to your life rather than ignore.
Exactly. But it's still informative and it's good to know, like, even the parts that we don't necessarily agree with, it's good to know that it is part of the tradition so that if somebody else brings it up, you can say, oh, yes, I am familiar with that. And you can have an intelligent opinion about it. I mean, you're free to disagree with Steve and I. If you find paradox number 3 and 4 important to you, by all means, have at it.
Exactly.
One thing that's important to remember is that Cicero was writing prior to the late Roman Stoics, Marcus Aurelius Seneca and Epictetus, so he was drawing from earlier sources like Zeno and Chrysippus. And for the early Stoics, either you were a sage or a fool. There was no conception of degrees or being on a spectrum of progress. It was a binary. Either you're sage or fool, that was it. So since nobody is known to have ever achieved the status of a sage, that means all of humanity are fools. And the early Stoics apparently viewed this as motivational and that it would lead to everyone striving in every moment to embody the sage. But I would argue that it would have the opposite effect. If you know that in the history of humanity as unlikely a sage has ever existed and everyone that falls short of being a sage is morally equivalent, why bother trying to make progress? No matter how much progress you make, you're still a fool. According to the Stoic paradox, even if your shortcomings are rather pedestrian, you're no better off than a tyrannical dictator or a serial killer, a rapist, a mugger, or a con man. The later Stoics, on the other hand, did seem to agree that either you were a sage or a fool, but they recognized that there was a subcategory of fools called philosophers that were always striving to make progress toward virtue and that making progress on that path to virtue had value. So philosophers were and are not sagers, but philosophers, by definition, love wisdom and value virtue, and that is something worthwhile. And in the modern context, I don't think we should be looking down upon or excluding people from other traditions, religions, and philosophical schools that value and strive toward virtue. Listeners to this podcast probably have a strong preference for the school of Stoicism, but I think it's incumbent upon us as cosmopolitans to view everyone trying to make progress toward virtue as our brothers, or at least cousins, even the often maligned Epicureans.
Oh, for shame. All right, Cicero, Paradoxa Stoicorum, number 4. Could the mind of the wise man, fortified as with walls by depth of counsel, by patient endurance of human ills, by contempt of fortune, in short, by all the virtues, a mind that could not be expelled out of his community, shall such a mind be overpowered and taken by storm? For what do we call a community? Surely not every assembly of thieves and ruffians. Is it then the entire rabble of outlaws and robbers assembled in one place? No, you will doubtless reply.
So the fourth Stoic paradox is entitled that every fool is a madman. And that's a kind of provocative statement because, as we mentioned earlier, every human is a fool by the Stoic definition because none of us are sages. And I think the basis of it is that only the sage could perceive the world correctly, and everyone else, all of humanity, really have a distorted perception of the world because they are hampered by their mistaken value judgments and their susceptibility to passions. And what is madness if not a disconnection from reality? And since only the sage perceives and interacts with the world correctly, the rest of us are mad.
Mad, I say mad. I know I am. I know that they're kind of saying, yeah, like only the sage can see things clearly, as you said, and so only they have the priorities set correctly. They're the only ones living according to nature all the time. And if you aren't a sage, then you're misperceiving reality, which by the Stoic definition means you're mad, you're crazy, you're not seeing the world as it really is and how it truly works, and you're not living according to the way things truly work. So therefore, you are on the wrong path and you're mad. And only when you break through that mystical barrier into perfect sagehood are you finally free of the madness.
And kind of like paradox number 3, I don't think it's very useful to our lives. I agree with some aspects of the logical form of the argument, but it's one thing to value the wrong things like externals or to be prone to the occasional passion, and quite another to be incapable of reason or to be profoundly mentally ill, for example, like acute schizophrenia or
Right.
something. And I think that it is. I think there is a spectrum, and there is a way to be closer to the madman end of the spectrum as opposed to the more rational end of the spectrum. And I think it's worthwhile to make efforts to be as close to the rational end of the spectrum as possible. And that I think it has value that
Yeah.
we're not all equivalent.
We know that when we're saying madman, we're not disparaging anyone with suffering from any sort of mental illness or anything. We're talking from a perspective of someone just misperceiving how the world works so they're misconstruing how the world works so wrongly that they're living life in a way that does not align with nature at all. And from a Stoic perspective, that is a form of madness. You're not living up to the spark of Zeus that you contain within you. You're misusing it. You are misperceiving reality and wasting your time on this planet, and that is a form of madness.
I do think that I can say this for 3 and 4, that this view could have the positive effect of reducing our pride and our vanity.
Sure.
Because when we interact with our fellow human beings and they're behaving poorly, or at least in a way that we perceive to be behaving poorly, we can remind ourselves that we too fall short of the ideal in some ways, and that can encourage us to be humble and have patience with other people.
Sure. But I agree with you. Yeah, it can help us to remember that we are all in the same boat. None of us are perfect. It's kind of like Jesus saying, "Who is without sin,
Cast the first
cast the
stone.
first stone," or remove the plank from your eye before you remove the splinter from mine. And knowing that, yeah, I'm not perfect either. We are all mad, as the Stoics would say. But I think there is value in remembering that we can make progress, as you said. Climbing a mountain, you're not either at the bottom or on the peak. You can make progress towards that mountain peak, and hopefully, when it's time to board the ship, as Epictetus puts it,
You'll
you're
be further along
yeah,
than
you're
you went
further
when
along.
you started.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
and I think it also 3 and 4 can serve to mitigate our urge to compare ourselves to other people. To say, look how much more enlightened I am than that fool over there.
Right. No one ever does that, man.
Because if instead you view yourself to be their peer in foolishness and madness, you'll be more concerned with correcting your own shortcomings rather than being haughty toward other people. So I can see that having some value, but I don't think the binary is very useful in general. I think that it's better to recognize that we're progressors, and the people that are striving to become better and more rational people are doing something worthwhile.
And this, if I remember right, this paradox also has a lot of missing text in it and has a little bit to do with exile. There's a lot of other things mixed into this text that make it a little complicated. And so we can see that in the reading, the wise man is fortified by counsel and patience and all these acts of virtue. and it's mentioning how that person would relate to the community. Of course, the community is full of madmen or whatever, so it's kind of difficult to interpret. But Cicero is talking about Stoic paradoxes here, but he's also commenting on politics and other things that make some of these translations a little opaque from time to time, or a little oblique.
Yeah, it definitely sounded like this paradox was written kind of in a first person perspective. Like, when you came to my house and set the roof on fire and sent me into exile, and you entrusted me to the care of other nations and things like that.
Yeah,
It's a pretty confusing one.
yeah, and I think he kind of is saying, I survived exile just fine because I'm pretty darn virtuous. So
Yes.
it's
He
kind of
he was
like
definitely tooting his own horn a little bit. And yeah, that kind of flies in the face of the trying to mitigate our haughtiness.
right, exactly. It's like, I am so humble. I am so much more humble than you. That kind of thing. So yeah, it's interesting to think about, and it's a way to be humble. But beyond that, I don't find it to be something I'm going to reflect and journal on a regular basis.
I concur. Shall we move on to Stoic paradox number 5?
Number 5, take it away, Dan.
Okay, so Stoic paradox number 5 is entitled That the Wise Man Alone is Free, and that every fool is a slave. How or over what free man will he exercise control who cannot command his own passions? Let him in the first place bridle his lusts. Let him despise pleasures. Let him subdue anger. Let him get the better of avarice. Let him expunge the other stains on his character, and then, when he himself is no longer in subjection to disgrace and degradation, let him then, I say, begin to command others. But while he is subservient to these, not only is he not to be regarded as a general, but he is by no means to be considered as even a free man. Cicero, Paradoxa Stoicorum, number 5.
So, if you are the manager of the local Wendy's, for those Americans here, or whatever fast food restaurant you have, and you are subject to passions like being angry or overeating or not showing up to work on time, then you should not be regarded as the manager of that Wendy's. You're not even a free man. There you go. So, how can you lead others? How could you be considered something great if you are chasing your own passions? You are a slave to, as Jesus might say, to like worldly pleasures or something. You're chasing those things around, and you're not using the power of reason. You're not following nature. You're not living according to nature. You are instead running in circles, chasing after pleasures and other things that you think are good, but we know from previous discussions are simply indifference.
And the quintessential example, of course, is the tyrant. In Roman times, that could be a figure like Nero or Caligula, or one of the provincial governors who could sometimes be quite despotic. And in modern times, it could be the manager of Wendy's.
I figured we'd have more Wendy's managers listening to our show than tyrants, but yeah, yeah.
Well, right, but we do all still have tyrants and despots in the modern world. So, we have some modern political leaders with strong authoritarian tendencies, but it could also be extended out to tech billionaires and other oligarchs who abuse their employees. The Stoics would argue that these tyrants are not truly self determining, but they're rather subject to their drive to acquire ever more externals like wealth and power. And I think there's something to that.
Yeah, and Seneca says a lot about this sort of thing. If you ever want to read more about it, and I've quoted this one several times recently, but once again, you're trying to climb that ladder, trying to get more and more and more. And the more you have, the more you seem to want. And every time you say, well, when I get to this step on the ladder, I will be
Then
satisfied.
I'll be happy. Yeah,
Yeah,
then
but
I'll
then
be happy.
you realize when you get to that rung, it's not the top. It's just another rung, and there's more that you want above that one as well.
And what's worse is you look around at your peers and they always have something that you want, like whether it be they have a fancier car or a nicer house or prettier love interest or whatever.
Yep.
And there's never a never ending treadmill, as they say.
Exactly. Exactly. The hedonic treadmill never ends.
So now that we've established that the powerful and the tyrannical are not free, so what is the path to freedom? So the person who is truly free is the person who is free from their internal passions and can thus make correct judgments and perform appropriate actions. And because such a person is wise, they enjoy behaving rationally and fulfilling their social duties. As such, when they view externals as indifferent and perform appropriate acts to fulfill their social roles, they are truly free.
Yeah, they are living according to nature. They are using prudence, so they are living according to practical wisdom, which means they're not mad, right? and
And they know what their appropriate acts are, and they are just, so they know how to interact with their fellow humans,
and they choose those actions.
right? And they choose those actions, and they have the courage to enact those actions in the real world.
And since they choose those actions freely, they are free. And theoretically, then they're happy as well, and they're living a life according to nature. None but the wise man is free. For what is liberty? The power of living as you please. Who then is he who lives as he pleases, but the man surely who follows righteousness, who rejoices in fulfilling his duty, and whose path of life has been well considered? The man who obeys the laws of his country, not out of dread, but pays them respect and reverence. The man who is swayed by nothing so much as by his own inclination and judgment. The man who is master of fortune herself. The wise man alone does nothing against his will, nothing with pain, nothing by coercion. All wicked men, therefore, are slaves. They are not slaves in the sense that the bondmen, who are the property of their masters by purchase, or by any law of the state. But if obedience to a disordered and abject mind, destitute of self control, be slavery, and it is, who can deny that all the dishonest, all the covetous, in short, all the wicked, are slaves? Cicero, Paradoxa Stoicorum, number 5. So the wise, I'll say the wise man, but the wise person, the sage, chooses the right thing every time because they are so aligned with reality that they freely choose what makes the most sense. And therefore, they are not making decisions out of fear. They're not making decisions out of what they think will look cool to their neighbors or make them look good in someone's eyes. They are making the right decision, the one that is aligned with their morality, the way that nature works, what is best for the community, so on and so forth. And so they make the best choices possible and they do it freely. Therefore, they are not led by passions or any other external. They're led by their internal moral compass, which is based on alignment with reality and that little spark of the divine in which they carry within them. So they are not slaves, but everyone else who is chasing after money, chasing after success, reputation, and all those things that Epictetus puts in the category of externals. If you're chasing those things, then you are some form of slave. And Epictetus likes to point that out himself, as you may recall from some of his works.
As often as possible.
Exactly.
But as we said, that's him being ironic because he himself was born a slave and his audience were typically aristocratic Romans. So it was funny to have the slave calling the aristocrats slaves.
Exactly. So yeah, this one I can kind of lean in. We can kind of agree on a little more that if your compass points to the wrong North Star, you're you're following the wrong things. You're going to be scared more often. You're going to be worried about losing what you have. You're going to be wanting more, and you'll probably start cutting corners, start treating people poorly, being asocial, and just living a life that's less honorable, as the Stoics might say. And that's a form of
Especially
slavery.
Cicero. Cicero loved to talk about honor.
Oh, yes. So, what can we learn from today's episode? Well, remember not to get too full of yourself. Even if you are making progress, that we're all still in the same boat. We're all still mad in some sense. We're not We're blinded by our prejudices. We're blinded by our misunderstandings. And that the more we can shed this baggage of striving for external goods, goods in quotes there, for externals, and we start pursuing true goodness, which comes from within. As we do that, we'll become more and more wise, more and more less a slave, more and more less mad, and more we'll start to resemble more of that sage that the Stoics talked about. Even if we can never reach the peak of the mountain, we can make it further up the side of the mountain. So keep striving. Don't worry about not being perfect. Try to make progress. And the only way to do that is to do this every day. Wake up in the morning and say, today I will seize the day.
Carpe diem.